A very good evening to all of you. Today our topic of discussion would be answer writing for UPSC. Now numerous students have been sending their answer copies for evaluation. Many of those copies we have been going through and also try to provide some of the feedbacks through YouTube. But let's discuss some of the key points that are very essential before you write your mains, be it the 2021 mains or the next mains for those who are targeting for the next mains. The most important thing that we need to focus for the mains answer writing is, first of all, knowledge. Now, this is the gap which cannot be filled by anything else. Knowledge is the key. If you have the knowledge on the subject, you can write well. Otherwise, you would create extra spaces. There would be undue spacing which would be created. By all means, it would be clearly represented that there is lack of knowledge. So, first of all, the thing which is most important is fill up this knowledge gap. The second important thing is presentation. Presentation is something which is very personalized. Now I cannot give you a key outline that this is how you must present your answer. The presentation of person A can be very different from the presentation of person B. Since it is subjective in nature, be very careful. Since your mains answer writing is subjective in nature, you have to understand that there is no one key golden formula for this. What you have to do is understand what style suits your writing the best. So some of the students probably start with a flow chart where they try to explain the thing, but some of the students on the other hand introduce a flow chart which is totally irrelevant just because they have seen toppers doing it or someone who has qualified have recommended them to do so. So they do introduce a flow chart, but probably meaningless. In that case, rather than you might feel that, oh, my answer looks good, but since it is the knowledge base is weak there, it would probably lose you more marks rather than gaining you marks. So be very specific about the style of presentation. It's not one good style that fits all. The next important thing is a lot of students come up and ask about handwriting. Now, handwriting is something which you cannot improve the very last day. And hence, you should not focus on it at this point of time. At this point of time, your focus should be understanding how you can develop and enhance your knowledge into the field. The next important thing, specifically for optional students, any optional, be it any optional, I'm being very general today in discussion of answer writing, be it any optional, and specifically if you are a non-optional student, that means let's say you take geography as an optional, but originally you are an engineering student, you are probably a commerce student but take public administration or law as an optional. Now when there is a switch of optional, either you have switched it within your attempts, which I definitely do not recommend that you do it by any means, or if you have chosen an optional which is not based on your subject, in that case, it is utmost important that you read authentic books. Now, when I say read authentic books, read standardized books, not just the books which have been translated by some other authors into the local language. No, definitely not, because there is where you would not find good concepts, and unless and until you do not have good concepts, there would be a knowledge gap which would be reflected. So read authentic material. A lot of students coming up and saying for optional we have covered the material which was freely available on the web, we have heard some of the YouTube videos and the NCERT. Is that fine? Definitely not, because the reason being you are competing with a student who has already written masters in that subject. And the student who has already written masters in that subject has studied that subject for last 2 years and therefore has definitely a good understanding and a base which is much more strong. So to compete with those students, you have to have good understanding of the concept and an in-depth knowledge which is very essential. Clear? So those are some of the things which you should keep in mind here. Now, the next important thing which comes is diagrams. Diagrams are essential part only when they are relevant. As I mentioned, if you feel that this diagram is not relevant, please do not introduce it by any means, because it would just have a negative impact. You would not get anything positive, no bonus marks out of it, but definitely you can lose marks out of it, because it gives an impression that you are not knowing the subject, you are not knowing the field, and you have unnecessarily introduced something for the sake of introduction. Okay, so irrelevant context, you would definitely lose mark. Do not introduce it. Next important concept. This is related to theories. Now, here is where the twist is. A lot of students introduce name of the theories, big names, for the sake that they know the subject, to be introduced in the answer, just for the sake of introducing those names and probably not knowing anything about it. I have a very good example. I've seen one of the copies where a student introduced a question where the general concept of spread of iron and steel industries in India was asked, and the answer started with a growth pole theory, and then this growth pole theory was highly successful and it developed into a core periphery model. And then because it developed into a core periphery model, there was cumulative causation. Now, can you help me understand even the fact that I have introduced the name of 3 theories from regional planning here? None of them would make my answer sufficiently good, despite the fact that I'm trying to prove to the examiner that I know the name of so many theories. So don't do that mistake by any means. Make sure whatever you introduce is relevant to the context, and even it is not required that you introduce the name of the theories for the sake of introduction of the name of the theories. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions for answer writing, feel free to just drop those in the comment section and I'll be more than happy to take those. So the idea is, don't introduce the name of the theories, the name of the concepts unnecessarily. Do not introduce irrelevant diagram. Next important thing, no unlabeled diagram. A lot of students do not label diagram. There are unlabeled diagram. So no unlabeled diagram should be there. Any diagram that you draw should have a proper labeling, a legend or a title at least. If I draw a map of India and I write, okay, iron and steel. Now what I do with this map? If it is just, I mark just few circles, I would have to point out, okay, this is the region where you have limonite deposit, this is the regions where you have hematite deposits, and so on and so forth. So there has to be a proper labeling to understand the question. There is a question, how to answer a question if we do not know much about it or have a less knowledge about it. Okay, very, very fantastic question that you have come up. Yes, Shrima Reddy, I'll be a little slow, definitely. So let me take the questions one by one. So the first question is, what if we do not have more knowledge about the question, or we have little knowledge about the question? It is okay to write whatever you know. Let's say there are 3 10-mark questions, okay? Or 3 questions where you have, I keep it very simple. Let's say you have 3 questions where you have to write 1 page each. Okay, 2 of the questions you know perfectly, so you fill the complete 1 page, perfect answer. Okay, the next question you do not know a lot of things. Now, there can be 3 ways of attempting it. First is, I leave it unattempted. Definitely, since it is unattempted, no marks, so 0 is the best option that I can get. Now, let me think that I write it as the same as the previous answer. Okay, so I fill the space unnecessarily and complete it with irrelevant information. Now, what would be the impression? Probably, understand the case, the examiner has so many copies to read. Now, when the examiner has so many copies to read, probably this was the answer, or this was the question where he or she caught you, and they now understand, okay, this person is writing irrelevant information. Now that impression is set in the mind of the examiner. So probably for the next answers even, either each of the line would be carefully checked, or there would be a biased impression about the copy that a lot of answers are written just for the sake of writing. Okay, so don't do that. So don't leave it empty. Don't write irrelevant information. The best combination that you can do is write whatever you know. So probably examiner would know, okay, this is an honest person and they have written what they know. So probably these two were full pages and this is half page, but whatever is written is apt and correct. So I believe that would be the right strategy. If I am the person who is checking your copy, that is what would be my opinion. Probably the opinion of others could be very different from mine, but that's what I personally recommend to students. There is another question asking about, can we make only flowcharts in some questions? No, not at all. Okay, the reason being very simple. Consider you have already given numerous exams through your childhood. You have already appeared for your class 10th exam, class 12th exam, college exam. Was there any point in life where there was a long answer question and you drew only flowchart and you secured good marks, exceptionally brilliant marks? I don't think that was a case ever. Now, when this was not the case, why do you have that question in mind now? So that strategy remains more or less the same. It's the same way of writing answers, but the only thing is the ratio in which you get the marks is substantially different. So probably with class 10, 12th, your long answers, you would secure 90 plus very easily. But here, getting 60 plus would be a big challenge. So nothing has changed, not the person, not the copy, not the answers, but the things change. Okay, so there is another question. What are the best elective subjects? Ravi Kumar, again a very good question. I have taken one video previously where we have talked about deciding optional and how to decide the optional. So probably I'll let you know one general rule here. Across all subjects, there is we can say a kind of proportional representation that exists. That means 10,000 students appear from let's say subject A, and 1,000 students appear from another subject, subject B. Now, if the UPSC has a target of selecting 1% students across all options, probably from this you would have 10 students that would be qualifying for the interview, and probably from this you would have 100 students who would be qualifying. But when you read the general interviews, when you talk to people around, when you hear toppers interviews, what you think is, okay, there are many people taking this optional, so this is a good optional, a wise optional. No, that's not the case. So it's just a representation of how many candidates are appearing with that optional. So by all means, it does not mean that any subject is good or any subject is not good. The overall merit remains 60 across all optionals or across all subjects. Probably that cannot be a case. A student of mathematics can score very high, but that's not the case. You do not have 100% there as well. Again, you have many scientific students, scientific subjects even in arts, but again students don't secure 100%. So the merit across all subjects would remain more or less the same. So it does not matter what optional you take based on which is a popular optional. But yes, based on your interest area, based on your prior studies, you have to select your optional, and that definitely matters. Abhishek has a question. Is there a negative marking? Now Abhishek, this is something that you have taken from my, you have read my mind, I would rather say. The idea why I was telling in the previous question that a student who has written irrelevant information gives instructor a kind of mindset that the person is writing something irrelevant, I have to be more keen while checking the copies, or I have to, probably all the answers would be of the similar style, and that itself is an impression which is letting you lesser marks than you could have had. So there is officially no negative marking, but my point here was to point out that it creates a negative impression in the mind of the examiner, and since it creates a negative impression in the minds of the examiner, there comes a problem. Okay, so don't introduce irrelevant content, don't introduce just diagrams, just flowcharts, unnecessarily technical terms which are not useful at that point, at that location. Do not ever do that. That would only land up with losing marks rather than gaining marks. So the same examiner, if was supposed to give 8 marks in a question in the previous scenario where everything was running normal, reading this answer which was irrelevant, for this answer your marks drop to, let's say, 5. But for all the answers after this, probably there is a mindset which runs in the mind of the examiner, and you would have a dropped marks for all of those. So make sure that does not happen. So those were some of the key points that we have discussed. Definitely, Seth, we would be covering many interesting topics in the upcoming lectures. Wish you very good luck. Practice a lot of questions, and here we have some of the modules which are available where you have the practice sessions. I do provide personalized one-on-one telephonic call for all answer writing. So wish you very good luck for your upcoming examination. Have a wonderful day ahead.